Okay, let's unpack this. We often hear about how incredibly powerful AI is becoming. I mean, finding needles in digital haystacks, processing mountains of text almost instantly, really pushing the boundaries. But what if the real challenge for these advanced systems isn't about finding something present? What if it's about noticing something? Well, something missing. This deep dive is going to reveal a fundamental blind spot. Large language models, LLMs, they're incredibly good at finding information that's there, but surprisingly poor at noticing when information is absent. And that unexpected limitation, it has some profound implications for how we use AI.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is this new benchmark. It's called AbsenceBench, and it puts LLMs to the test on precisely this counterintuitive challenge. It asks models to identify what was deliberately removed from a document. The results are quite revealing. They really underscore an unexpected blind spot for even the most powerful systems we have today.
Okay, so let's start where LLMs really shine, just to set the stage. You've probably heard about the needle in a haystack test, NIAH. This is where you bury a tiny, maybe surprising bit of info deep inside a huge text, sometimes millions of tokens long. And you ask an LM to find it. And they excel here, right? They've really pushed the frontier, showing remarkable abilities to pinpoint specific facts, even in just a vast ocean of data. It's like they have this unparalleled ability to scan and retrieve.
Right. And AbsenceBench, well, it was designed in direct contrast to that. It's specifically evaluating an LLM's capacity to detect missing information. The core task is quite distinct. Models get both the original complete document and then a modified version where specific pieces have been intentionally taken out. Then the model has to identify which pieces were removed. On the surface, it sounds pretty simple to describe, completely unambiguous to a human. And the researchers looked at this across 3 different areas to see if it was universal. They used poetry, numerical sequences, and even GitHub pull requests.
Could you maybe give us a clearer picture? Like, what did those tasks actually look like?
Sure. So for poetry, imagine you have maybe a well-known sonnet, and then you get a version where a line or two from the middle is just gone. The LLM gets both versions, and it needs to tell you which line is missing and what it said. For numerical sequences, think about, say, the Fibonacci sequence, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. What if you show the model 0, 1, 1, 3, 5, 8? It needs to spot that the 2 is missing. And not just notice a gap, but recall the specific value, the 2 bit that should be there. Then for GitHub pull requests, this involved code changes, like maybe a developer submits some code, but they removed a really crucial security check or a specific function call that was in the original file. The LLM's job would be to flag that critical omission. These are all cases where noticing what's not there is really important.
And the difference in performance between these two types of tasks, finding what's there versus finding what's not there, it's really striking, isn't it? While LLMs can get almost perfect scores on NIAH, AbsenceBench is drastically harder. We're talking about a massive average drop. I think the paper said over 50% in their F1 score.
That's right, the F1 score, which balances, accuracy and completeness.
Compared to how they do on NIH tasks.
Mm.
Even the top models, like Claude 3.7 Sonnet, which are great at complex stuff, they score much lower on AbsenceBench, often only around, 70% F1? And that's on a medium context benchmark, average 5,000 tokens.
Yeah, it's not even super long context.
And to really see the difference, a model like Mixtral 8x7b, which gets perfect scores on NIH at similar lengths, it basically falls off a cliff on AbsenceBench. 14.7% F1 score, that's a huge gap.
It is, and if you connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights something fundamental. Being superhuman at finding what's present doesn't mean a model is good at detecting what's absent. It's a surprising distinction in their capabilities. It really suggests a difference in how they understand or process information compared to how we do. For us, noticing something missing can be just as immediate as seeing something there. For LLMs, it seems like a fundamentally different and harder challenge.
That's really counterintuitive. I mean, they have all this processing power. They handle huge amounts of text. Why do you think LLMs would stumble so badly on something that feels so basic to us? Noticing a simple absence.
Well, the researchers propose a pretty compelling hypothesis. They think the transformer attention mechanisms, which are, the core of how these LLMs work, they struggle to attend to gaps in documents. Think of it like this. When something is there, there's a specific token or a sequence of tokens for the model to focus on, a key it can lock onto. But a void, an empty space, a missing piece of information, it doesn't offer that same tangible anchor. It's like trying to shine a flashlight on darkness. There's nothing for the light to bounce off. The attention mechanism just doesn't have a specific input to see or process where the absence should be.
Okay, so if that's the theory, this attention to gaps problem, how do you test that? What did the researchers actually do to try and, prove it?
This is where it gets really interesting. They tested the hypothesis with a pretty clever experiment. They introduced placeholders into the modified document, so they explicitly marked where information had been taken out. Instead of just deleting a line from a poem and leaving, a blank space, they did insert a special token like missing line, or maybe just a string of underscores right where the content used to be. This gave the attention mechanism something concrete, something tangible to see at the spot of the omission.
Ah, okay. And what happened? Did giving the model something specific to focus on actually make a difference?
Oh, a huge difference. The results were a resounding validation of their hypothesis. Explicitly marking the omissions with these placeholders dramatically boosted performance, right across the board. For instance, just using that missing line token improved performance by an average of nearly 42% across all three domains, the poetry, numbers, and code.
Wow, 42% average.
Yeah, and some models saw even bigger jumps. Llama 4 Maverick showed something like a 54.5% improvement compared to the baseline where there was no placeholder. So this strongly suggests that the lack of a concrete sequence for the attention mechanism to, attend to, is a really significant part of the problem. When you give them something tangible to see where the gap is, they do much better. It's almost like they need a signpost pointing to the void.
But the AbsenceBench study didn't just stop there, right? Beyond this core idea about attention, they found some other interesting factors, things that play a role in how well LLMs spot what's missing. What else did they uncover?
Yeah, one key factor was context length, which is a bit counterintuitive compared to those NIAH tasks. In the needle and a haystack tests, context length usually only starts to really bite when you get to extremely long inputs, like over 100,000 tokens. But with AbsenceBench, even at these medium lengths, under 5,000 tokens, they saw performance vary quite a bit. Longer context made the task harder, especially, it seems, in the poetry domain. This suggests that the type of information and the nature of the task itself can change how context length impacts performance. It's not just about how much text there is, but what you're asking the model to do with it.
And then there was that finding about the rate of omission. That sounded completely backward to me. Models did worse when fewer lines were missing. How does that work? What's the thinking there?
That's right. It is a surprising finding. Models performed worse when they had to recall fewer missing lines. The researchers' hypothesis is quite clever, actually. They think that a higher omission rate, so more missing pieces, can actually lead to more consecutive omissions. Missing lines clumped together. And when you have several missing lines in a row, it sort of paradoxically makes it easier for the model. It can just generate text consistently until it hits something that isn't omitted, like finding big, obvious holes. But with fewer omissions, you have more long stretches of continuous text. And that makes it much harder for the model to spot those few subtle interruptions.
Like finding a tiny tear versus a huge rip.
Kind of. The small, isolated absence is harder for the model to perceive.
It sounds like our brains are maybe wired to notice those subtle deviations, but LLMs almost prefer the more glaring changes.
Interesting. What about how you actually ask the model? Did the prompt structure make a difference? Yes, definitely. The way the instructions were presented in the prompt mattered. They found that giving the instructions before the actual content, the documents led to better performance, particularly in the poetry and numerical sequence tasks. It suggests LLMs are more effective at detecting omissions when they get their task instructions up front. It sort of sets the frame, tells them what to look for before they start processing.
Okay. And what about just giving them more time, more compute power to think about it? Does that help find the gaps?
It does help, yeah, but it comes at a significant cost. Models that use a thinking mode, basically generating internal reasoning steps before giving the answer. They showed a modest improvement, about 7.9% on average.
Modest, okay.
But this came at a really high computational price. They generated an average of 8,000 extra thinking tokens, which is nearly 3 times the average document length for these tasks, around 2,700 tokens. Gemini 2.5 Flash, for example, had the highest ratio, generating almost 6 thinking tokens for every single content token.
Wow, that's a lot of extra work.
It is. And it's also worth noting, closed source models generally did better than open weight ones, but they also generated about 42% more thinking tokens on average. So that suggests this thinking ability, while helpful, comes at a premium. It's a trade-off. It's a small gain in accuracy for a big jump in computational cost.
So this deep dive has really shown us something quite fundamental. Even as LLMs achieve these superhuman levels on tasks like finding that needle in a haystack, they can stumble on something that seems, on the surface, much simpler. just identifying a gap, noticing what's not there. It highlights this fascinating and sort of unique shape to LLM intelligence. It's not quite human-like in how it perceives presence versus absence.
Absolutely. And this limitation, it has real practical implications, especially when we think about deploying LLMs in roles where spotting missing information is crucial. The researchers specifically bring up use cases like LLM as a judge. Imagine an AI asked to evaluate legal arguments or evidence. If a key piece of evidence or maybe a critical legal precedent is left out of the input, well, the LLM might struggle to even notice that absence, and that could lead to an incomplete or potentially even a flawed judgment.
That's a really profound point. Are there other areas where this kind of absence blindness could be a serious issue?
Certainly. Think about tasks like grading, for instance. An LLM grading an essay might be great at spotting well-supported points, but what if a student subtly omitted a required section or didn't include a key counter-argument? The model might not flag that structural gap. In legal reasoning, too, beyond just judging, maybe drafting contracts, omitting a specific clause or detail in a witness statement that could have huge consequences, but an LLM might just skim past it. And importantly, misinformation detection. Often, misinformation isn't just about saying something false, right? It's about what's deliberately left out. Crucial context, conflicting data, alternative views. If LLMs struggle to detect these subtle omissions, their ability to really identify nuanced misinformation could be compromised. So it raises an important question for you, the listener. How much can we really rely on LLMs for these critical tasks if they can't properly notice when information is missing? The research suggests our current ways of evaluating LLMs might even be misleading if they ignore this absence recognition capability.
So as you encounter more AI-generated content or content evaluated by AI, maybe consider this. What isn't being said? What isn't present? That might be just as important as what is there. How might our understanding of AI change if we focus more on what it struggles to perceive, rather than just celebrating what it excels at?